I'm Daniel. A little bit about myself is I think this kind of slide explains a little bit of what you're up to in my presentation today. So sometimes I'll start a sentence. I don't know where it's going, but I'm here for the journey, and I hope you are too. So we'll find our way as I'm starting to talk. Something about myself, I'll tell you a little bit of background and a little bit of my obsession. So I'm obsessed with startups. And I think the reason why I'm obsessed with startups is because it is, I'm going to do a Venn diagram here. It is the combination of what I love doing and what I suck at. That's kind of, I'm in that sweet spot right there. And so I've been doing startups for a very long time, but currently I'm at Duolingo. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history of my career, my professional development here. So at first I started studying at BYU as an undergrad, studying business strategy, and I legitimately thought, dang, I'm so smart, I could probably be the CEO of Apple Computers. Like, it can't be that hard. Like, they just need to come up with a bigger iPhone, blah, 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 whatever. So that's who I was. That was my state of mind. And then I did a startup, and I realized, wow, life is a maze. And so beautiful. And then the startup failed, and so life sucks. So I did that for 3 years, and then life sucked for a very long time because I wanted to do a startup. But then I joined a company called Jane.com, and I joined as a software engineer, and I was like, this is fun. I can build stuff. I don't necessarily just have to talk about it. I can actually build stuff. And then they switched me as a PM, and I guess I'm a PM now. I actually don't even know how I transitioned from software to PM, but here I was, being a PM. And then I joined Lucidchart as a PM, and I realized I'm going to be a PM forever. So if I'm going to be a PM forever, I'm going to go to like some big company. So I went to Dropbox, and whoa, that was tough. I made a huge mistake, I realized. And nothing wrong with the company. It was a fantastic company. I still text with some people in the team. But I was there for like a few months, and what happened there was I learned a lot about myself. One of the things that I learned is that I really like to be in B2C. I don't like B2B as much. The other thing that I learned is that I didn't want to feel like a little cog in a big machine. I wanted to like have a bigger say in the direction of a product. So I decided to join somewhere that was a little bit smaller. And I joined Duolingo at a great time, actually, I would say. And I realized, wow, my life has meaning again. I can do stuff. And I've been at Duolingo for the past 3 years. Currently, I'm a director of product there, and I'm a general manager for a new app called Duolingo ABC. It's an app that kind of seeks to teach little kids how to read. And I love what I do. So I'm going to start with giving you a little bit, some truth bombs is what I'm going to call it. Here's the first truth bombs. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we all have jobs. And my goal here is to offend everyone in this room. So if you don't feel offended, you should feel offended that I didn't think of you. How about that? First of all, PMs exist because designers can't think objectively. Am I right or not? Right? Like, oh, all the components have to be like the same, and you know, the spacing is so beautiful, and it's like nobody cares. Like, nobody's using the product. Why are we working on these components, right? So PMs exist because designers can't think objectively. Now, even worse, designers exist because PMs don't have any skills. Right? It's like our skills are like we can think, we can talk to people, and we can create Jira tasks whenever they ask us to. So I have a next slide. The next slide talks a little bit more about kind of what PMs actually do. UX research exists because PMs and designers are just lazy. You know? They're like, I'm too busy on my Figma file right here. And so UX research is like, fine, I'll do something. Data analysts exist because probably your data is a complete disaster. You need someone basically with a PhD to go make sense of your data. And the last one is, I have no idea why Scrum Masters exist. So again, if you're not one of these groups, I hope you also feel offended that I didn't think of you. Now, a little bit about PMs right here. This is actually what PMs do, right? It's like engineers working a tight deadline, and it's like product manager like, hey, let me know how I can be helpful, right? That's actually what we do on a day-to-day basis, okay? So that's truth number one. Now, let's go to truth number two. I hate this mentality of failing fast. I honestly hate it. Like, I get it. What we're talking about here is like, you know, you want to learn fast. So if you're going to fail, might as well just do it fast. That's so stupid. Like, that's not the goal. Why are we talking about the process instead of talking about the goal, which is success, right? If you focus on failing fast, you're going to fail fast. And I hope you feel good about yourself, right? Like, what happens when you think, like, let's just fail fast? Let's just put crap out there, see what we can learn. Well, if you put crap out there, you're going to learn that your crap sucks, right? That's what you're going to learn. So try a little bit harder. I really don't like this mentality of failing fast. I get it, learning is important, but learning is important when you actually try to do something good. And this mentality changes things and makes you do things that are kind of crappy. Next one is you're probably a baby. You're closer to a baby than you realize. So here's actually something about it. If you're angry, this happens to me all the time. Sometimes I'm like really upset and I can't really point my finger to it. 99% of the time is caused by one of these kind of 4 things. Either you're tired, right? You didn't sleep well, or you were up too late watching The Office, like me. You're hungry, or you need a diaper change, right? Maybe you need to check yourself real quick. And the last one is maybe someone's like you, hey, we need to chat, right? And if someone's like, hey, we need to chat, oh my gosh, I hate that. So you're probably a baby. Now, truth number 4, you don't need PTO. You need a new life. So what we mean by this is I hear about this more often from my peers and friends and people that work outside the company as well. And there's this feeling, we've been in a COVID year, and people are like feeling pretty burnt out, right? Like you can't tell you wake up and you're in a computer, and then you like move and you're with kids, and it's just like, wow, I feel so burnt out. So here's the analogy. Imagine you have a phone, and the phone has a broken battery. The battery just doesn't work. So your friend comes over and says, you know what you should do? You should plug that phone for 2 days straight. Don't touch it. Just plug it in for a very long time, right? So you're like, that's a great idea. I'm going to plug it in, make sure it's really charged. And what happens the moment you unplug the phone? The battery dies. Because guess what? It's not that you needed to take like some time off because you're feeling burnt out, and you're like, oh, you feel burnt out? You should take a week off, take a really long time off. And then when you come back, you go back and you open your email, and you're immediately burnt out again. So what's happening here is you don't need PTO. You don't need to charge your battery. You need a new battery. You need a new life. You need to change something about your circumstance. So that's something that I don't like about kind of PTO, is saying, hey, burnt out. Last one, the NPS is garbage. I don't know why we still use this thing. That's the whole slide I put in here. I don't know what to say about this, but it's so easy to manipulate. It's impossible to run A/B test against. I don't know what the point of NPS is anymore, so I just want to be on the record that I'm officially against NPS. All right. So we're going to talk a little about how products work, and it's about to get pretty heavy here in a little bit, so kind of bear with me. So here's how products work. You build a product people love, and then you blow it up. That's it. That's a 2-step process. If you do that, you'll be successful. So let's talk a little bit about the first one. You start building something, right? It could be you're a PM and whatever designer, and you're like, but Daniel, how do I know if I build something people love? How do I know if I have product market fit? The answer is you don't. Meaning, you don't have it. If you're asking yourself the question, I wonder if we have product market fit, you don't have it, right? When you have product market fit, it feels very different, right? The type of problems you're having is not like, oh, how do we make this work? I wonder if people even care about this. You're wondering like, oh my gosh, we have all those requests. The servers are going down because like we got so much traffic. Very different situation. You don't even pause to think if this is working. It just works. But in case you're not self-aware, let me tell you a little bit about how you can tell. So I drew this curve right here. X-axis is like monthly cohorts. Y-axis is percentage retained. So what happens here, if you plot long-term retention, so think about month-to-month retention. So month 1, you're going to have 100% retention because 100% of people that sign up on month 1 use the app that month. So you're going to have 100%. The following month, it's going to drop. Maybe something like 65% of your users who sign up the previous month are using it the second month. And then you do that for every month. Now, if your curve starts to asymptote with the x-axis, and it never touches the x-axis, right? You have product market fit, basically. I mean, there's a few examples of this. Let's say you run a test like GMAT or something. You're probably going to get like one-time usage, and then it'll kind of disappear. That's OK. But most of the time, you have something like this with the asymptote. So if you haven't plotted this for your product, I recommend that you do that and see how it looks. Particularly, I think most of us have been here in a situation where the company's been around for more than 12 months. So if you have that data, just try it out. Now, here's how it looks like if you don't have product market fit. The retention curve touches the x-axis. So what this means is that if you have a billion users sign up to your product today, in 4 months, you have 0, right? So that kind of sucks. So that's how it looks like if you don't have product market fit. Now, this is the worst scenario. This is another slide. Is if your retention curve gets into the negatives. I don't even know what this means. Never seen this before, but if you have this, you should be very concerned, because this probably means that for every user that leaves, they take someone else with them, you know? So you don't want to be in this situation. But typically, you're mostly in the first two, third one that never happens. So what happens here is people say, well, we need to work on retention, right? And so you think about onboarding, right? I used to think about it all the time. Every place, for some reason, when I was a startup, I worked on retention all the time because like, this is not working, so I need to make a good product. When I was at Jane, I worked on retention. When I was at Lucid, I worked on retention. When I was at Dropbox, I was working on retention. When I came to Duolingo, I was working on learning and also retention. Everywhere I've been, I work on retention. And my initial thought every time is like, people would ask me, the CEO, whatever, like, work on retention. My first thought was, I'm going to work on onboarding. But in reality is, you start reading all this blog posts about like how to improve retention. It's like, oh, you got the no star and the magic moment, activation rate. And actually, it's all true. It's just really boring. And so what happens is, you start thinking, how do you improve retention? And you start thinking, well, geez, we have 4 steps in our process. Let's make it 3, or let's remove friction. And you run all this A/B tests, and you find out, like, well, some of these A/B tests are fantastic. Look at this one, plus 7% D1 retention, plus 14, plus 20, plus 8, whatever it is. And you're like, this is great. And then you look at your DAU graph, and it's like flat. And you're like, what the heck is going on? You've been working on retention for like 8 months now. You have all these wins, and DAUs are like, nothing changed. Well, 2 things that probably happen here. Let me tell you a little bit what's going on. Number 1, you might have a user who is like, I don't know. Let's say I want to use Duolingo because I work there. And they're like, I don't know. I'm just going to download this app. And it's like, that button was a little small for me. I'm going to leave. Right? And then, so I'm a PM there, and I'm like, let's make the button bigger because they couldn't find it. So I make the button bigger, and for that user, I'm like, well, that button was pretty big, and I was clear, and I'm going to click on it now. Right? So now my retention is better. But guess what? If someone's leaving because they had to fill up 1 extra input field, or they had to, like, you couldn't find the button because it wasn't blue, it was blue instead of green, whatever it is. If they're leaving because of that, I can guarantee you they're going to leave. It's just a matter of when, right? If they don't leave today, they will leave tomorrow, because your product is probably way worse than your onboarding experience and is more complicated than just putting your email address, right? So you're optimizing for people who are leaving, right? They're going to leave. It's just a matter of when. So who cares about those users, right? The second reason why your DAUs might be flat is because you didn't do the math. So let me tell you a little bit about this. And this is where it gets a little bit heavy. Now, I don't know who created this. I don't know if it was Zynga or my boss or some other random dude. I don't know who did this. But I'm going to teach you a little bit of how you can structure your users, and you can use that to identify all the levers you have to increase retention. So it gets heavy. So stay with me. And if you're not with me, that's OK. I think this is being recorded. So at any point, you can go back and like pause it and like actually look at the graph and see if it makes sense to you. Wow, these colors are pretty ugly. All right, first one, acquisition, right? So you acquire a user, come from like an ad, or they found out from a friend, whatever. So you acquire the user, they become basically new users. If those users, so this is people who have been active in 1 week, right? If those users came back the following week, we're going to call that current, well, they turn into current users, people who have been active for 2 weeks or more, right? So they were active 1 week, they come back 2 weeks, that's current users. And this blue line right here, is a retention rate. So that's new user retention rate, NUR, okay? Now, if they did not retain, they probably left. So if they left, we're going to call those people inactive users, users who have not used the app or your product from between 7 to 29 days. Okay? This, if you want to measure kind of what happens, you basically do the inverse of 1 minus NUR. That gives you how many people are leaving from new signups, right? And from current users, there's also like a bucket that kind of leaks, right? If people have been using the app for 2 weeks, and they come back, they become, that rate is current user retention rate, CUR, right? People who have been active for at least 2 weeks, what percentage of them come back the following week? Typically that's a pretty big bucket, and that's CUR. If they leave, if they don't keep retaining within that blue bucket, then they drop into inactive users. So you following me? This is getting complicated. It's about to get way worse. Hopefully you're following me so far, right? So you get new users, first week. If they can't come back, they become current. If they keep coming back, that's current user retention rates. If they leave, they become inactive. Now, if they were inactive and they come back to use the product, they're reactivated users, and you have their reactivation rate. And from that reactivated users, you guessed it, they can either become current or inactive, right? So again, I haven't used the app between 7 and 29 days. I come back and use the app. I become a reactivated user. Before, I wasn't using the app. Now I am. So now I count as a DAU again. And where did I come from? I came from this inactive pool of users. If I come back the following week, I become a current user. If I drop, I come back to the bucket of inactive users. Okay? Now, this inactive users has its own bucket as well that leaks. If you leak from inactive users, meaning you haven't used the app from 729 days, then you stop using the app again. After you still don't use the app after that, so 30 days plus, then you become a churn user. I think they actually call this dead user, but I think that's pretty intense calling someone like a dead user. So I chose churn user instead. If you come back, this is where it makes sense why they chose dead, because then it becomes resurrected user, right? Typically, a lot of products have like a kind of cemetery of like tons of users who stopped using the app who once tried it. If you come back, that's resurrection rate, like what percentage of your total bucket that are dead, quote unquote, come back. Now the 4 buckets on top, new users, reactivated users, resurrected users, current users, they're all like count towards your DAUs. Those are your total DAUs. And you guessed it, from resurrected users, you might leak, or you might turn into a current user, right? Now, why did I share with you this incredibly boring slide? Because if you were to fragment your users like this, then you have immediate access to all of the levers that you can pull to increase DAUs and improve retention. The way you improve retention for someone who hasn't been using the app for 130 days, who come back, is going to look a little bit different for someone who's the first time trying your product, right? So maybe for the churn users, and they come back in resurrection rate, maybe you need to do a little bit of onboarding again. Show them what's new in your product. Show them around, right? And if they stick, then become current users, right? We, Duolingo, we keep track of all these numbers. All these retention numbers, we have all the DAUs broken by the different buckets, and it helps us be organized in our efforts. Now, I would say at Duolingo, we do have an onboarding team, and they're doing pretty fantastic stuff. But when you plot these numbers, right, you can actually do an estimate of where you want to put your efforts. Let's say you only have one team, and you want that team to increase retention, right? You can plot all these numbers and do a simulation. You can say, well, what happens if we increase current user retention rates by 1%? Holy smokes. If your user base is like 30 million daily active users or whatever, and they're like 80% of them are current users, improving that by 1%, you're going to get millions of DAUs increase, right? If you increase current user retention rates. Maybe onboarding is only you get like 400 users per day. So increasing that by 40%, 60%, it's not going to do anything to you, right? So doing this will help you understand, and this is what I mean, like when you work so hard on onboarding and you don't see DAUs flat, probably because you're doing it wrong or because you didn't do the math, right? This helps you understand a little bit of all the buckets. All right, so let me give you an example. And I'll just kind of cruise through the next few slides. But, this is so boring. There's some numbers in there, but my attempt here is to show you that these numbers look very different depending on your business. So I completely made all this up. Actually, it doesn't make any sense. The retention rate with the count doesn't make any sense. But if you look at this, this is saying that this product has a 95% new user retention rate. Dang, that's high. Now, this, and then the current user is 45%. That's pretty low, I think. So if your app is like, for example, this is this shop app that I get all the time. So every time that I make a purchase in Shopify, they're like, download this app to track your package. Awesome. Download it. I have it here. Maybe this is amazing if you're like a package tracking app, because you track your package, and then your package is delivered, and then there's nothing else for you to do. So user retention is fine. Current user retention, you don't care as much because it's 100% tied into a purchase. Now, if this is Facebook, and that means that for people who have been active for like 2 or more weeks in a row, only 45% come the following week. Dang, this sucks, right? So put it into context about kind of what this means to you. So let me tell you a little bit about how I apply this at Duolingo, and then I'll wrap it up for kind of questions here. I was doing some user research real quick, and I was talking to users, and I'd ask them like, hey, why are you learning a language? And Duolingo is an app to learn languages for free, basically. And they would say something like, oh, I want to learn Italian. And like, oh, that's great. Why do you want to learn Italian? Oh, because my wife married this guy from Italy, and I want to be able to talk to the family. So like, that sounds cool. And then I was like, wait a second, when do you use Duolingo? And they would say something like, I use Duolingo probably like 9 o'clock, when I'm putting my kids to sleep. Oh, okay, let's assume for a second that it's 9 o'clock at night, you pull up the app, you use Duolingo, and the app is gone. It doesn't exist. What would you do with that time? And I was expecting something like, oh, I'll probably just download the competitor or order some language books online or get a tutor or whatever. Nobody said that. Everyone said, you know what? I'll probably just go to Instagram. I'll probably just play Candy Crush, whatever. And I realized that for at least a pretty big percentage of the population here, our users are not language learners. They're people who have 15 minutes at a time they want to do something productive. And the way they express that is like, I've always wanted to learn a language. Well, here we go. So in that context, this is why we believe at Duolingo that staying engaged is one of the most difficult things when it comes to learning a language. So I was doing this research. At the time, we had this thing called clubs. It was a cemetery of a feature, basically, because we limit to 50 people who could be there. It's all gamified. And I was talking to users, and they're like, oh, tell me about this feature. And they're like, oh, this kind of sucks. Nobody's there, and like, maybe because people churn, and eventually if you limit to 50, everyone eventually kind of churns, whatever, and then you end up with just a few of them. And then it's kind of awkward just to interact with them. And I got this quote. It says, like, this whole feature sucks except for this thing on the top right. And if you see there, at top right, this thing says leaderboards. It's like, and this guy gave me a quote. It says, like, some a-hole passes me on the leaderboard, and it drives me nuts. And so I had to go back and crush him. The leaderboards would like reset every week, and you were always cohorted with the same group. And I'm like, dang, this is interesting. Like, there's only 3 people that you're racing with, but like, this guy's so motivated. Talked to a few other people, told me the same thing. So what we did is we built this feature that we killed clubs, actually, and we built this thing called leaderboards. And we tried to make it way better. It was more in front of the users, and we addressed certain things that was wrong with clubs. For one, you only get cohorted in this group of people you're competing with, like 50 people, if you use the app, right? So the top 3, if you're a top 3 that week, it's a weekly cohort. Then you get promoted to the next league, right? So it's like it goes from bronze, silver, and gold, and then next week you keep competing with harder and harder people. And if you're the bottom 5, whatever, you get demoted to the previous one. And then guess what happens where you're at the end, the top of the leaderboard? Nothing happens. It's just, wow, you made it to Emerald or whatever. Don't tell that to our users. And then the results were like mind-blowing. It was absolutely fantastic, right? Like we had, and I'm not going to show you the numbers because you don't want to show the numbers, but it was amazing. I mean, retention, like long-term retention increased drastically, right? And the best way, the proxy we had to measure long-term retention was D14 retention, right? So it's like, you don't want to run a test for like 8 months to see what it does. Like, I don't even know if I'm going to be alive in 8 months, right? So D14 will help you know, like, hey, this is pretty good. D14 numbers were strong. D7, D14, if you're not familiar, it means like, hey, from the moment you get treated to the experiment, that you are in that experiment, 14 days later, right, you compare control versus experiment. Experiment's 14% higher than control in regards to people who use it, right? Oh, no, not 14%, that's D14. It might be like, I don't know, maybe went by 30, 40, whatever. So you compare how much that increased by, right? So retention was up. Time spent in the app just like skyrocketed like crazy. Another thing that happened was like people didn't use the app as much on Sundays. And that affected with another game mechanic that we have, which is streak, right? If you don't use the app on Sundays, you lose out on your streak, which If you lose your streak, it's pretty upsetting, right? Let's imagine you have like 100 or like 2,000 day streak, and then you lose your streak. You're probably not coming to the app like, oh, this is so hard. I don't want to do this again, right? But by doing this and competing, and like the cohort ended on Sunday, people on Sunday were like, I wanna compete. Like, I don't want to get demoted. And their usage on Sundays just skyrocketed, right? Which helped with the streak, which helped with retention, et cetera. Right? So this is an example of how you could look at the data. You can talk to users, you identify their needs, their jobs to be done, and then you build a product that makes an impact for long-term retention. So hope this is helpful, and that's all I got. Oh.
Give it up for Daniel.
And I realize I'm wearing a Divi hat, but I don't work there. That's just kind of what I'm wearing. Cool company, though.
All right. So I think the first question that people want to know is, why do you dislike Marty Kagan so much?
Who asked this question?
I did.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, and this is on record, dude?
Just kidding, dude.
Okay. Well, we can talk about that offline. No, he's great. No, it's good stuff.
Ashley asks, you talk about the Band-Aid fixes that we tend to do. In your opinion, what can we do to create true fixes?
Geez, honestly, like, only you would know, right? Like, the thing is, you're trying to, like, add value, right? So, yes, there's a place for, like, reducing friction, in my opinion. Like, you should be making your product really easy to use, and you should be spending quite a bit of time optimizing, especially if you already have product market fit. But at the end of the day, is trying to add value to the users. Like, how do you, I don't know, whatever, that will look different depending on what your product is, in my opinion. But just focus on just adding value, making their lives better, make sure that the product does something that they like and that it solves a need. It's a very broad answer, but it's a hard question to answer without details.
Yeah. I mean, you had a really good graph around acquisition. My question is, how do you identify what affects the user retention trends the most? So as you watch the numbers of that acquisition strategy, and how do you identify what affects those trends?
Yeah, so you can actually do like a simulation, right? So you can put it in spreadsheets. If you have, the tricky part here is having access to the data, which is where your maybe data analyst comes in handy because it's tough, right? But you know, Duolingo, we can, I was able to kind of pull off some pretty good numbers by myself, right? And you can do some simulations, right? So some of the simulations might be like, all right, track over time how many people you have in each bucket and what do your retention rates look like, right? And you have that historical data. You don't know what's coming in the future. So then you say, well, shoot, our current retention rates right now seem like 82. What if they're 83? And you just change that number, 83, and then you kind of, if you're good at spreadsheets and Google Sheets or whatever, it can just populate, see kind of what would happen to DAUs if each kind of retention rate that you care about changes maybe by 1%. And what you find is, particularly for like consumer products, is that current user retention, that current user bucket is typically pretty massive. It's the biggest bucket you have besides maybe churn users, right? And if you increase that by a little bit, it has not only has the biggest impact for DAUs, but it also has the biggest impact for like long-term retention, because your product basically is better. So
Great.
Simulation is my answer.
Cool. So you mentioned NPS, and people had some questions on NPS.
All right, let's talk about NPS.
If you don't like NPS, how do you measure feedback that is more subjective in nature?
You know, that's like, I think all these tools are like, the way I like to compare is like, there's a bunch of tools you can use, and it's kind of like eating, right? You might have forks or spoons or knives. You don't only need a knife. Like, basically, NPS is like a spork. Nobody should ever use it, right? But it's out there if you want to, I guess. You should be using forks and spoons and knives, right? Chopsticks if you want. Those are pretty good too. And so what I mean by that is, like, you know, how do you measure this? There's different ways you can do that, right? Yes, you can do surveys, right? And NPS is a type of survey, but you can go a little bit more detail. One of my biggest pet peeves with product managers in particular, and sometimes UX researchers, is we want to make sure that we can analyze the data so easy that we make the surveys really bad, right? So what I mean by that is sometimes you send a surveys and they're like, why did you start? How do you feel about the app? Scale 1 to 10, right? And then we can plot it and we're like, oh, look at this. This is big, it's amazing, whatever. But you have no idea what they're actually saying. What if you instead left it as an open-ended question, like, how do you feel about the app? And you just leave, maybe that's a bad question. And you just leave it open. And people can put whatever they want. It's a lot harder to analyze, but the data you get is more pure and clean, right? One, you're just kind of playing to be a PM. The other one, you actually want to find the truth. Sometimes finding the truth is very costly. It takes a long time, but it's worth it. So there's surveys. You can talk to users. You can look at like the feedback they're coming back. You can look at social media and what people are saying. Typically, that's a pretty big indicator. For us, I found like a Duolingo Reddit. For some reason, Reddit is like amazing at knowing how people feel about the stuff that you're shipping. It's pretty incredible. And I'm not saying Reddit works for everyone, but you find your way and you do a combination of things.
How do you analyze all of that input from Reddit from a consumer standpoint?
So I don't think you necessarily have to be super precise about it. Sometimes you just kind of get like overall trends and how people are feeling. Having said that, at Duolingo a few years ago, one of the things we did is we looked at detractors. Now, for context, Duolingo is a free app. Now, we do have a way to kind of transact, but you can learn, free users and paid users can learn just as much, right? And we build all this stuff for everyone, and for some reason, people go in and then they hate us so much that they go in public and then they hate on us. Nobody ever used Duolingo and blah, 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 and complain, right? And it's very interesting because, like, what is going on there? So something we decided to do along with a UX researcher, maybe because I'm lazy, I don't know. No, she was actually really, really good. We went and looked at all the detractors. So we spent quite a bit of time looking at all these kind of social media platforms, Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, YouTube, reviews, anything that we can find online, forums. And then we just analyzed it all. We read through thousands and thousands of reviews, and we categorized what was going on. And I don't think I can share exactly what we found, but basically, it was something like 60% of all the hate online came from like one course. It was one particular course that we were doing really bad at. 60% of all the people that were going way out of their way to hate on us were this kind of one course. So, and then the second was a very similar course. So we created a team around focusing on those particular courses to work on it. So you can do that, right? It's costly, but it's worth it.
Awesome. One last question.
Yep.
So Ben Crabtree says, how do you know when you have product market fit for products that aren't subscription products?
Yeah, so for example, like I don't know what he's thinking about, but like physical product or whatever.
B2B product, like
yeah. So B2B, you can kind of, I'm not a master of B2B, but like there's probably very similar metrics in regards to kind of retention or like people who like renew their licenses. Maybe that's one metric you can look at. When I was at Dropbox, it was very interesting. Our growth was pretty impressive. Our cohorts, if you sign up in like let's say 2012, whatever, that cohort of 2012 made maybe, I don't know, I'm just making some small numbers. Let's say it made $1 million. That same cohort, the following year, made more money. Those same teams made more money than the previous year. In the following cohort, they made even more money than the previous 2 years. And so what happened was like the product was so good that within the company, people were telling each other, and the licenses were growing, and each cohort that signed up would make a lot more money in the following years. And so that's another way you can look at, getting a feel for product market fit. Although I would say, I'll be honest with you, sometimes it is kind of just a feeling like you get all this information and you have to be pretty self-aware. But it's like, dang, if you're like, this is growing, feels good, people are saying great things about you. Another way you can tell if your product market fit is kind of litmus test for me, is if you're embarrassed to tell your friends that you work there, you probably don't have product market fit, right? Like we have this one course at Duolingo that I just like, every time someone say, oh, I'm learning X in Duolingo, I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. The other courses I feel great about, right? But that's one that you can tell like, geez, there's something about it doesn't feel right. And it's because of all the information you have around you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Daniel. Let's give him another round of applause, and we will give you guys a break.